Why is it that some property investors are able to turn a property of 400,000 into a cash cow that gives them 6,000 on a monthly basis? So this enables them to take care of their monthly expenses and still leaves them with money as cash flow, while you are struggling with your expenses and you ultimately have to take out money from your pocket to meet your monthly expenses. Once you understand the concept of property investing, it makes it less painful for you and makes it more of a joyful experience. This video is meant to be a step-by-step guide that will enable you to be able to start your property investing journey. We all have that uncle who has told us that you will never go wrong with property. However, the question is, does that apply in 2025? Because a lot of things have changed. I can guarantee you that it does not work like that anymore. We really need to know which properties not to buy, how to finance the properties that we're about to buy, and who should be on our team. If this is the type of content that you enjoy, make sure that you subscribe and also leave us a like. Before you search for that property that you want to buy, you first have to prepare yourself financially as a property investor. You're probably asking yourself, how does one prepare themselves when it comes to their credit score? So we will be breaking it down, that how does one get prepared for your credit score as a property investor. Most investors or most people will want to know if they only qualify for the property. However, we need to pay special attention towards the condition of acceptance, because we need to understand that at what interest rate was I charged. So credit score is one of the measures used by the credit bureau when it comes to risk tolerance, if you are high risk or low risk. So your credit score is designed to show you your strengths and weaknesses based on your performance when it comes to paying back and utilization of credit facilities. So remember something as a side note, with different credit bureaus will be using different scores. So the score that we will be using today, just to give you an highlight in terms of how the scoring works, we are using TransUnion. So this is an example of how the scoring table does work. And Lebu, where would you want to find yourself as a property investor?
You'd always want to find yourself here on the excellent part.
So you can use platforms such as clearscore.com on a month-to-month basis to understand your credit score, so that you can put certain measures to better your current score.
So by now you're probably asking yourself that what is the reason for me to have a good credit score? Well, this is what you need to know. Credit score affects your interest rates. So now the lower your credit score, the higher your interest rates, which ultimately means that you might be losing out on money on a monthly basis because the banks have actually given you a higher interest rate. Now let's put this into perspective. Now say we sign an offer to purchase for a property at 400,000, take out a deposit of 80,000 and finance 320,000 on that property. Each 0.5% increase will cost you 100 Rand on a monthly basis. Now looking at it on a bigger scale, this is 1,200 Rand on an annual basis. Over 20 years, this is 36,000 that has actually been taken out of your pocket. Now you might be saying that it's not really that much, but now when you're looking at it from an affordability perspective, that's when it starts affecting you as a property investor or as a property buyer. Unlike primary residence, when you're taking a loan for business, the bank deems it as a higher risk. So these are the things that we need to consider when we are actually looking at taking out a loan for investment property. When you have a lower credit score and you still want to apply for that loan, chances are the banks might reject or give you a higher interest rate with a bigger deposit than someone that would have a good credit score.
So let's talk about actionable steps that you can take today to improve your credit score. One, which we all know, is making sure that we pay down the credit that we have already taken. At least utilization should be at 30%. So if you have a credit of a whopping 100,000, just make sure that our expenditure right now should be below 30,000. Number two, we should be keeping a close eye on apps such as ClearScore, because what happens sometimes is identity theft. You might not know that someone is living their best lives out there with your credit card. So to avoid this, just make sure that from a month to month, you are keeping a close eye on your credit score.
Now, the next one is avoiding new credit cards, right? Now, I understand that with some people, what is important for you right now is getting that particular credit card. However, once you've gotten that first credit card, make sure that you are keeping between 6 to 12 months before you start applying for another credit, because if you are applying for different types of credits on a monthly basis, that raises red flags to the credit bureau that you might actually be needing credit, of which we do not want the credit bureau to believe that. Now, the second one is avoiding to close down these credit cards. So now, once you have applied for the credit card, try by all means to keep it for a long term. So now, someone having a credit card for the next 5 years compared to someone that only opened their credit card and closed it within 6 months, the guy with the 5 years has experience, which is good for your credit score. So the longer you are able to hold your credit card, the better the credit bureau actually perceives you as an investor.
Point number two, which is market research. This is not something that is optional as an investor, because a lot of beginner investors would go in a transaction emotionally. So now, once you do not do market research, you find yourself in an area you don't understand how much is the rent, how much are other properties similar to yours renting out, and if you are to sell tomorrow, at what price can you be selling at? Which is very risky, because it's as if you are blindfolded in a competitive market. When investing in property as an investor, you need to understand your target market, because ultimately your target market will guide you in a sense whereby how sustainable is your business. So when it comes to especially rental, we're looking at how far are the amenities towards your property. We're looking at the accessibility of that property to public transports. These are key elements that we need to take into consideration before we buy.
So say for example, you have two properties that you have to decide on which one are you going to buy. Your target market are students from University of Johannesburg, Soweto campus. Now, if we are saying that we'd like to buy a property for student accommodation and we have two properties that we have to buy, it's either we're buying one in Protea Glen Extension 28 or we're buying another one that's in Pimville Zone 1. So now, for someone that bought the property in Protea Glen Extension 28, it would take them around 30 to 40 minutes for them to drive from that property until you get to the University of Johannesburg. Now, when you're looking at someone in Pimville Zone 1, that person, it only takes them 4 minutes to actually get to the university. Now, one might be saying that, yes, but the target market is still there if people want to live in my property. Now, look at it from a different perspective, whereby you are now having to offer transport for people that are living in Protea Glen Extension 28. Now, this means that service of the car would have to fall on you. This would also mean that petrol of the car would also need to fall on you. Now, remember, we cannot charge students more because we have a car that will actually get them to that property. Now, what we need to understand is that the closer our property is to the university, the less expenses that we have to incur, which means that the more money that we will actually be receiving on a monthly basis. So every time you think about going into property investing, understand that what is your main goal. After understanding what your main goal is, that would make it easier for you to identify that in which areas should I be buying properties.
So actionable steps before buying that property, there are 3 points that one needs to take into consideration. Number one is the accessibility to transport from your property. So number two, we're looking at our target market. So yes, if we were saying that we're specifically looking at students, now we need to make sure that the environment or the property itself, it's close to the university. Then number three, which is most important, is how much are people paying for a similar property towards yours, so that you can at least gauge in a sense whereby what will be the amount that I'll be collecting before I even buy the property.
Understanding the value of the property might be something that is huge for you to understand, because some properties on Property 24 are actually listed way below their market value. The lower the offer that we put in, the higher the income that we can actually grab from that property. We could all agree that someone who bought a property for 600,000 will be paying more than someone who has bought a property for 400,000.
With the case study in mind, whereby we are collecting 6,000 for two properties, whereby one was purchased for 400,000 and the other one was purchased for 600,000. So for the one for 400,000, their total repayments on a monthly basis will be 4,129. Whereas the person who purchased property B at 600,000, their total repayment will be 6,193. So it's clear that the more you are actually negotiating lower, is the less repayment you'll have. So ultimately, if we're both collecting 6,000, that means the person who bought it less will be cash flowing more. So with that being said, there's three things that we need to take into consideration. Number one, which is most important, is how much can we put rental before we buy the property. Number two, which is very important, is how much is the value of that property. And number three, we need to know, when it comes to negotiating, what is the lowest price that we can go for, so that we get to keep that cash flow.
Now that you have these three aligned, your credit score, the market research, and property evaluation, now you need to understand that looking at your property, how do we get it to a place whereby we are able to compete with the market? Understanding how much you would need to renovate the property so that it is competitive is really important. How you're going to be renovating the property is not going to be based on what you like or what you don't like. We basically need to be looking at the area and what moves faster. So by moving faster, we mean that which properties or what is in those properties that make people want to rent out the property. Now, if you are in an area whereby most, if not all, properties are modern, then you would also want to get that property to a space whereby it is also modern. One mistake that a lot of people do is that they go by themselves and they do not consult an expert in this. So what I would recommend is that go with a contractor that understands that what work needs to be put onto this property. Now, once you understand, or once you got a quotation from the contractor, then you are able to analyze or make sure that the offer that you're going to be putting is up to standard.
It is now clear that there's actually a lot that goes behind the scenes when it comes to investing in property. And what we are doing is that we are opening our doors whereby you can set up a Zoom meeting to rather understand how can we mentor you in making sure that the decisions that you take are strategic and you invest like a pro.
That's how you buy your first property.
Invest like a pro
with no wealth.